So this presentation is based on work that we started last year. You might be familiar with our campaign around an Atlantic electricity vision. This year, in collaboration with the Pembina Institute, David Suzuki Foundation, and Ecology Action Center, we're really operating as a little team working on electricity issues in Canada. They're carrying the lead this year on some of the technical reports that we need to do this work. I've focused through the Conservation Council on understanding where the public is at. Obviously, we can't do the work we need to do or that we hope to do around electricity issues without both a good solid technical foundation, but also a good public understanding, because of course this is a social campaign as much as it is a political or policy or technology campaign. The presentation is going to go this way. I'm going to talk to you about what we've done in this research, give you a little bit of some caveats around it, share some results, talk about the top line results, really summarize those. But really the core of the presentation today is what I think comes out of the research in terms of communications, framing, campaigning, and so on. So the research, we've done quite a bit, including starting with a focus group, which I like to do. I like to listen to people talk. We did that in May. It was Atlantic wide. We had 53 people on an electronic focus group. It was really interesting. We also did a survey in June, in the third week of June, and we've also done a narrative scan of stakeholders and how they talk about electricity issues. And all of that really informed the design of the survey. And what was critical about this survey was I wanted yeah, I'd like to unmute too. Can folks hear me? Somebody just say so if you can.
Yeah, we can hear you. Sorry about that, Louise.
Thank you. So what we really wanted with this survey was a survey that had all options on the table, that was seen as credible and rigorous, and not what is called in the business, if you will, a push-pull, meaning you lead the respondents to answers that you want to have. And we did not do that. So I'm very, very excited about what we have found, but we also, as always, learn things. The survey was an online panel of over 950 people in the region, split between the 4 Atlantic provinces. And these sample sizes give us a chance to do nice, fancy analysis. And so I've always liked to play with data. So that made me happy. And we looked for a good distribution on gender, age, education, location, and political ideology. I can make my thing move, that would be great. Okay, so here's a note. The one thing to highlight for us is that people just don't think that much about energy, for sure about electricity. It's worse with electricity, and you might wonder why. Well, it's because it's invisible. At least generally, like gas or gasoline in particular, people have to go to a gas station, they can smell it, but electricity is just invisible. You don't think about it unless you've got a power outage or your bill arrives. And so generally speaking, and oh, please be on. So for many of the questions, people were either unsure or neutral. And so I point that out because it's an opportunity, for engaging people in education, but it also means that opinions are not well formulated. There are on some questions, and you're going to see that. And we analyze the factors that actually influence people having an opinion, whether that's a positive opinion on an option or a negative opinion, and what's behind not having an opinion. For example, people who identify as female, people who are less motivated toward environment, tend to be more neutral and not sure. And this is consistent in research I've done forever. And this presentation focuses on the Atlantic. We break it out by province. And as I mentioned, I worked really hard to make this a balanced survey. So here's some of the things that we know people say when they're talking about electricity, and especially when they're trying to pitch a particular approach to electricity. They'll talk about things like it's emissions free or it's clean. And so one of the things we wanted to do in this survey was understand what people understand when they hear the terms clean electricity and emissions free. What's interesting here is that, and this is on Atlantic wide because there really was no difference among the provinces, and I do break it out where there's some, but where there's not that much, I just show it to you total. Clean electricity is solar. 82% of Atlantic citizens think so. Wind at 80%, hydro at 59%. Coal, 9%, gas, 31%. And I would say here that people are conflicted on gas. You see an even distribution of people just not sure about this one. And nuclear, people, 25% of respondents said they think that nuclear could be considered clean. I'm going to show you some slides that kind of look like this. And so let me get your head into looking at them with me, and I'm going to describe them slowly. So in the top where the headline is, I'm going to summarize what the slide says. And then in the middle, I've got the question essentially and what the items were, the options, and then I've got the results. So let's go through this one, and then you'll really get into the swing of it as I go through these results. So electricity is clean when that electricity generates no pollution to the air or water to make electricity. In New Brunswick, it's 80% think that, Newfoundland's the same, Nova Scotia 84, PEI 75. So primarily people think that electricity is clean when it generates no pollution to the air or water to make electricity. But as many of you know, nuclear is also promoted as being clean. And so we include here no waste to make electricity, or no nuclear waste, sorry, to make electricity. And fewer people think that that's true, about 60, 65% across the 4 provinces. And the third option was no pollution to the air or water or nuclear waste to make electricity. And you can see that that also is close to the view around no pollution to air or water. So this and several questions will tell us, I think quite confidently, that when people hear the term clean electricity, they are primarily thinking of air and water. And generally speaking, we can be confident they are not thinking about nuclear. We also asked them what constitutes emissions free, another term that we always hear. And so these are the 4 things people are arguing generally when they're saying things like emissions free. They're talking about tailpipe or chimney stack pollution that's captured through carbon capture and stored underground. You can see that in all Atlantic provinces, people did not think that was emissions free. Or electricity is generated with solar, wind, or hydro, and you can see 78, 77, 79, 74. So 3/4 of everybody in the survey said that's what they think emissions free is. But because we know that the argument is that nuclear is emissions free, we ask that question in 2 additional ways. So is it emissions free when there is no nuclear waste? About half the respondents said, okay, no nuclear waste. But when you say, is emissions free when there's no air or carbon pollution, but there is nuclear waste, which is the scenario, for example, in New Brunswick, no. Less than 1/4 of the respondents said that that's the case. So now we even went further because, you know, I just wanted to make sure I understood the situation. We did it 2 ways in this case. So clean and emissions free, is it this or that? Is it that clean and emissions free does not apply to nuclear power because there are other environmental or social risks associated with it? Or does it apply to nuclear power because it does not produce greenhouse gas emissions? And of course, you can see here, I hope, that I'm representing in these questions the arguments that we see day to day, but also that we picked up in our narrative scan. And clearly, over half of respondents say that no, in fact, clean and emissions free does not apply to nuclear power because there are other environmental or social risks associated with it. So here we take them into another section about, do you agree or disagree with the following statements? Now, that's when you ask a person if they agree or disagree, you're asking them about their beliefs. So in this case, I wanted to know, what did they believe about the sources of electricity? What did they want that to come? Where do they want that to come from? What sources? So here's the answers. 71% say, I want my electricity come from solar, wind, and hydro. 53% say they'd like their electricity be sourced from within the Atlantic. And I want to cue you here to some very interesting elements here, that there's this preference for at home, and we'll talk more about that. 40% say large hydro dams, that's okay for them. And 38% say they're open to Quebec hydro. So you've got this idea that people want renewable, but this declining number as you go further from home, and you'll see that come back. 36% say they disagree that they want SMRs to be part of their electricity. Less than a quarter agree with that term or that premise. And 57% disagree. They want coal, oil, and gas. This looks wordy, but let me just, I wanted you, as you have the recording, to see the actual questions. This is a question where we're giving people the options to understand, or the words and the definition, if you will, of what's going on with this coal phase out business. So there's a series of questions here that says, you know, the federal government is requiring utilities in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia that burn coal to cut their greenhouse gas emissions, and so on and so on. We define that, what the options are, and then we ask them, do you support or oppose the following options? For coal phase out by 2030, respondents prefer to close the plants and replace with in-province renewables. After that, they are open to having energy come in from hydro from Quebec and Newfoundland. So solar, wind from within my province, 67% say that's what they want. Only 25% say they want to close the plants and use SMRs. 47% say they are open to closing the plants and having hydro from Quebec and Newfoundland, Labrador. No surprise, Newfoundland has the stronger view on that. We also wanted to have a question that it may sound like it's repetitive, but these are important for me to come at these things are from different directions to make sure that people are giving me an answer that I can feel confident in telling you the story about. So in this case, we gave them all of the options that are on the table. Let me just admit here. So Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, coal phase out options. These are the options on the table. Keep the plants open and capture carbon and store it. Close the plants, use SMRs, which is the New Brunswick proposal. Close the plants, use hydro, Quebec and Newfoundland power, which is essentially this idea from the federal government's conversations around an Atlantic loop, which we'll talk about. Close the plants, use renewables made in my province. Keep the plants open, find reductions elsewhere in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So let's knock off the ones that don't have support. All Atlantic citizens are not interested in keeping plants open and using carbon capture. They are not interested in keeping the plants open and finding reductions elsewhere. What they really want are to close the plants and build renewable capacity to replace them within their province. And that's highest in New Brunswick, but the scores are quite close. So coming in kind of close to that, as you could see in the previous slide as well, is hydro from Quebec and Newfoundland, Labrador. Here I get into a little bit more detail on these proposals, especially in New Brunswick around small modular nuclear reactors. So here we find people are almost evenly split. And this is where you also see we're getting into a level of detail where the public is not yet engaged. You can see half or more are not sure or neutral. Okay, so this is really important stuff, but it does give us a sense of, not to throw these responses out at all, but it gives us a sense of where people might go once they form opinions and how important it is for us to help people form opinions. So in this case, we basically said, you know, you saw the intro New Brunswick's proposing 2 pilots. And I throw out here some options or arguments for or against. So here it says, you know, SMRs will take 10 to 15 years to build. We can't wait. The climate change means we must close the plants now. We need to close the plants when SMRs are ready. We don't have enough renewable capacity now, so we need fossil and nuclear. And there is enough renewable capacity now, so we don't need fossil. And what's important here is people are split across these options. And I think to some degree, if you look at the third option, so the gray bar, you know, people are basically saying, you know, we don't have enough capacity yet. And that's actually factually true. But they do want to see, you know, SMRs, you know, the coal plants closed and worry about the timeline. But they also, we've got a third of people also saying, you know, close the plants when SMRs are ready. So this is, you know, in terms of where people are right now, if you're concerned about that kind of issue, you really want to be getting in there and laying the options on the table and supporting people to come to an opinion, because this will shift over time. I think, though, that the results suggest the direction they would shift would be toward renewables, not nuclear. So we also know that in New Brunswick, there's a proposal for a type of SMR, Moltex is proposing it, that would recycle or reprocess, existing solid nuclear waste, creating a liquid nuclear waste that we are unfamiliar with in terms of management. But the way it's described is to recycle it. And the public thinks all recycling is good. And you see that here, that certainly in New Brunswick, that the term, when you say you'll recycle, you know, we included this 1% reference because it's about what would actually be recycled. But even there, the words recycle do tend to see in New Brunswick people say that's a good step. About a third say it's not an improvement, and a third not sure. You see that in Newfoundland, Labrador, and it has the highest or its strongest result, I guess you could say, in terms of seeing that not as an improvement. And it's interesting because if people are thinking about integrating electricity on an Atlantic basis, it may be people in outside of New Brunswick, in this case, who may be the strongest proponents for not having nuclear within their system. So we also wanted to look at the factors that influence people's opinions about electricity. We wanted to look at what they thought the different electricity sources would do to their rates and reliability, their views on the Atlantic Loop. If you haven't heard of that, I will describe it. And what's the most important thing they're thinking about when they're thinking about electricity. So in this case, we asked people to indicate from a list what's important to them when they're thinking about electricity. And what's interesting was that, and consistent with what I've seen in other research I've done and others, that natural environment, effects on the environment, effects on health and safety are clearly important, as are the effects on the regional economy and consumers. And so these three things, the sustainability matrix, really top people's thinking when they're evaluating electricity. Those with an opinion, in this case, on the topic of what approach to our electricity would affect our rates more. Now, why would I ask this? Well, we know that, and this will come up again, that people are very interested in how any changes in the electricity system affects their rates. The issue of affordability is real, and to those of us who want to change the electricity system, there's no getting there from here without understanding how you explain it in terms of affordability. So you'll see the next little bit is about that. And so I asked the question, large hydro dams and nuclear power plants will increase electricity rates more, or will wind and solar technology increase electricity rates more? And I was fascinated by this. I'm sure, we still have a very high level of not sure because it's not something people think about. But to the degree people felt comfortable with an answer, they clearly leaned to large hydro dams and nuclear plants increasing electricity rates more than wind and solar technologies. What a fantastic foundation to work from in terms of engaging the public. It's where their instinct goes, and we just have to, I think, continue to make the case that, in fact, their instincts are right. We also, because we know reliability is important to people, wanted to know what they thought would increase reliability more. And again, the same two options, wind and solar and storage technologies, large hydro dams and nuclear power plants. And again, wind, solar, and storage would increase reliability more. Now, this to me also is an important result. Again, we still have about a quarter of the respondents not sure, but the fact is that the biggest argument against renewables from many folks who aren't confident in renewables the way some of us are, is that it would not be reliable. And here we see that the general instinct of people is that it would be. We also wanted to know what people thought about the idea that as we solve climate change, we are going to electrify more of our lives, right? Through transportation being more electrified, industrial processes being more electrified, home heating, cooling being more electrified. And we wanted to know, again, what people thought of this. I mean, some of the projections is that our electricity system will have to double in capacity to meet the needs. And so it's very easy for people to be concerned about the effects of that kind of investment on affordability. So here we gave people two options. We will spend the same or less on electricity because we will be more efficient, which is one argument, or electricity will cost more as we power more of our day-to-day lives. Another argument. Of course, we can have higher rates and lower bills if we're energy efficient. So I wanted to see where people kind of leaned on this. And what's interesting is New Brunswick is the most confident that we can spend the same or less on electricity, even as electricity powers more of our lives because of energy efficiency. It's a little bit lower in the other Atlantic provinces. And in all cases, except PEI, there's a perspective that electricity will cost more. Fewer people think electricity will cost more. Again, you still have a quarter not sure. Those are folks we want to reach over time and help form opinions. But again, I think these results are reassuring. So we provided an explanation of this idea of an Atlantic loop, which would link the Atlantic provinces and Quebec to create a transmission network to trade electricity among all 5 provinces. And we just wanted to see, what people thought of this idea. And you've got, over 60%, about 60% in Nova Scotia and PEI, a little above that for New Brunswick and Newfoundland, saying, okay. The total support meaning strongly support and support. Okay, so there's an openness there. And then we wanted to know, well, what do you think the advantage of this thing would be? Is it that it would help with reliability, affordability, environmentally sustainable? Again, we still have about a third is neutral. There's not sure. But I'm quite impressed actually with these results because I think the public got it right. And it's been my complaint all along that the hesitancy of governments to engage our citizens in a grassroots conversation about electricity and what we want misses the fact that the public wants to engage in these things and they've got pretty good instincts. Here they are saying exactly what it is that would improve reliability. It would improve environmental sustainability, and affordability is the lowest one. The first two I would agree, I think, and maybe you do too. That's pretty much what the advantage would be. We also then asked them, okay, when you're thinking about your electricity, what's the most important thing to you? And this is interesting to me because affordability, of course, comes up, and it shouldn't surprise us to see such a high score. Over half the respondents from Newfoundland and Labrador say affordability, given what they've gone through with Muskrat Falls. But the reality is that people say that they're concerned about affordability, but we've seen all the way through these results that, in fact, cost did not drive a lot of the results. Health and safety, environmental impact, their desire for renewables also. And so when we ask this one, we get affordability, but there's more going on than just taking that result at face value. It's a complex set of factors people are thinking about. So I'm just going to quickly run through what is it that's driving opinions. And this is where, for those of you who like to have fun with statistics, this is just the regression analysis work. And so I wanted to understand what factors increase the probability of supporting solar, wind, and hydro. What's behind that? And we had scales in the survey that measured environmental motivation, environmental identity could be a way of talking about it. You've seen me refer to what factors are important to you when thinking about electricity, but we also measured trust in academics, environmental groups, utilities, governments, and so on. And so you're going to see that pop up as we go through the rest of these results. And so the three things that are the most important to understanding what increases support, the probability of support, is strong environmental motivation, concern about health and safety, and trust in academics and environmental groups. Increasing support in coal, oil, and gas. The probability goes up if you are a person with weaker environmental motivation, more concerned about the economy and consumers, and oriented toward conservative. What decreases the support for nuclear? So less support for nuclear. And this is why I was saying it's interesting to think about engaging citizens throughout the Atlantic under this idea of an Atlantic loop, because they should have a say about what electricity is feeding into their system. People in Newfoundland, Labrador are less supportive of nuclear. Women are less supportive of nuclear. And if you trust environmental groups, support for nuclear goes down. In this case, I'm looking at what's increasing the probability that you believe that electricity is clean when it generates no pollution to air or water or no nuclear waste to make electricity. You'll recall that question from the beginning. Well, the probability of believing that is that you trust academics and you trust environmental groups. Those are the two most important factors. What are the factors that increase the probability of support for different coal phase-out options? If you are concerned about the economy and consumers and you make around 80 to 120,000 a year, for some reason, those two things improve your support for SMRs. If you live in Newfoundland and you're concerned about environmental impact, it increases the probability of supporting hydro. And if you are a stronger supporter, or the probability of you supporting renewables in your province, you're more concerned, more likely to be concerned about health and safety and be university educated. Okay, so just summarizing the nuclear story, I know for the New Brunswick folks it's important. Increases support for nuclear if you trust utilities. You earn, as I mentioned, 80 to 120. You're Anglophone and you're concerned about economy and cost to economy and consumers. Decreases support if you have strong environmental identity, you trust environmental groups, you're female and over 35 years of age. So let me summarize these top lines, and then we're going to just spend a couple of minutes on communications and campaigning. So top line, governments and utilities are out of step with what the public wants on electricity. That's not to say that I'm not accepting we had high levels of neutrality and not sure, but they are out of step, I would say. I can confidently say that they're out of step. There's a lot more openness on the part of the population, even though, yes, we do want to engage them more and let them engage in this conversation. Two, people want in-province renewables before interprovincial connections to hydro. The Atlantic Loop advantages reliability than affordability, and women are least supportive of hydro. I point this out because I keep finding it in research that I do, and I don't really know why, but women really don't like hydro, large hydro. Number 4, there's little social license for SMRs, especially among, believe it, I hope folks notice this, but among rural citizens, women and people are in particular 55 and over. So 2 things that I think are important. We need to consult the public to define the electricity vision for our region and our provinces. We need to set renewable energy targets and really advocate for them. And we need to remember that health, environment, and economy are primary evaluation criteria, and we need to build our story and our campaigns around those ideas. We need to nurture. So no matter what our policy goals are, there's always this underlying thing we should keep in mind in our campaigning work, I believe. And that is that the long game is to nurture environmental identity. People who are connected to nature, people who have stronger biocentric values, meaning they feel connected in it and understand the interrelatedness of nature and people. Always are more self-determined toward environmental goals. They're the people who are the most engaged. And so we need to drive that more deeply into the population. And we need to, engage people through their concerns about health and safety. Those elements are what underpin forming opinions. If you're not having strong identity and self-determination toward environment, you're not thinking about health and safety, you're not really forming opinions. And so to conclude then, we often think this is the work of competing technology options, but I really want us to think about the fact that actually this is work of values and trust and then information. So let me just see if I can move this thing that's in my way here. So I'm going to go around and move this thing. This is a message board, look wordy, but I'll tell you, a message board, I strongly recommend them. They're really cool and they're powerful. I'm going to take you through from the top issue, and we'll go around, and then we're going to talk about some framing. So the issue here is, I think, from the work we're doing, that government and utility policy is out of step with what the public wants on electricity. We need to do our fair share to avoid 1.5 degrees global warming. Fossil fuel power plants must close by 2030 and be replaced with renewables. Hi, I think somebody just joined who's not on mute. Could you please go on mute? Thank you. The challenge is that most people are not that motivated on the environment. People who trust utilities and friends and family, by the way, on electricity issues are concerned about costs to the regional economy and consumers, and our conservative tend to support nuclear and fossil fuel sources of electricity. We need to reach these audiences, and we need to be able to respond to messages that promote, especially on the fossil fuel side, options that lead to climate chaos in the near term. The opportunity is that we know people with strong environmental values who trust academics and environmental groups are worried about health and safety, and our francophone support renewables. So you'll see that I'm adding some additional detail. I can't put everything in the deck, but interestingly, francophones always show up as much more oriented on the environment. We need to mobilize these audiences. So the solution I'm suggesting here is that we need to establish the risk and opportunity propositions. We need to activate our alliances, identify trusted messengers, increase confidence in affordability, reliability, and the health benefits of renewables. We need to communicate and activate environmental values. We need to frame the narrative on the disconnect of on government and utility policy and what Atlantic citizens want. So the middle is kind of a narrative, right? A narrative that comes out of that setup that emerges from the research that we've been doing. So here, let me just test this out on you. Electricity powers our lives and will even more to solve climate change. We want our electricity to be affordable, non-polluting, and reliable. Renewable energy made from the sun, wind, and water is most affordable. Protects our health and the environment. We want our power from renewables. Governments and utilities need to listen up, unplug from NBs. In this case, you can see, I could just simply say unplug from fossils, but in this case, I put in NBs fossils. I'm going to go into, I'm just somehow, there we are. Okay, so this is a campaign goal I'm suggesting that we want to think about both in New Brunswick, but also throughout the Atlantic as part of our electricity reform strategy. I'm going to, because somebody who's not on mute, please put themselves on mute. I'd be very grateful. Thank you. In this case, I'm going to give you some of the New Brunswick flavor of it, but for our Nova Scotia and other colleagues, I really welcome the addition of what it would look like from your province's perspective, and then, of course, as we think about the Atlantic. But these are the ideas from this idea of a frame around unplug from New Brunswick's fossils. So you can see, of course, we're talking power plants and as well as let's call it old thinking. And so some frames popped out as I was thinking about, well, what does that, research tell me about communications? And here's some things that we've been playing with at CCNB. So one idea is power our power. And the reason for that is that, people have power and we need power. And we haven't engaged the public in exercising their power in the choices we're going to make about our power. And so, some plain tweets and things, ideas that we're thinking about, but things like, polls show New Brunswickers want electricity to be reliable and affordable, start the clean energy revolution in this province, power our power. The other one is that, certainly in our province here in New Brunswick, and I suspect in most of us would say the same in the Atlantic, we feel that government is dragging its heels on coal phase out. Polls show that New Brunswickers want clean energy here and now. What's the holdup? Listen up. And I think this idea of listen up is one that matters as well, because I feel that the public isn't being listened to and they're not being given avenues to express their views. This idea of share our clean little secret. Solar and wind energy are here now. SMRs are costly, hypothetical. Share our clean little secret. Again, that's for just getting this point across that we need action kind of today in the short term. There are obviously research opportunities in the long term. Who knows what will be delivered? Will it be clean? Will it be safe? It's got to be proven. And so let's go with what we know works today. The other element here is tell your friends and family, and this is pretty important. In our trust question, believe it or not, I've pointed out that trusting NGOs and academics drive the probability of increasing support or decreasing support for a particular source. But overall, the #1 trusted source of information on electricity is friends and family. And that is something that is concerning to some degree, but also a huge opportunity because we know that when people talk to each other about what they care about, we know this on climate change, that it can influence what happens. And so we should be telling people to tell their friends and family what they like. In New Brunswick in particular, there's supposedly a clean energy target that's coming from the current government, and there's no public consultation about that. So we're trying to drive some pressure around that. The other one is keep your dirty power. Coal, oil, and gas, dirty the air, cause climate chaos, keep your dirty power. So here's just a bit of a proposal for us to be thinking about. I mentioned that I believe we do need to establish our risk proposition, being fossil fuels cause climate chaos and pollution is no longer cheap, and our opportunities proposition that renewable energy is the most affordable and reliable way to power our lives. And tactics, in this case, I'm using New Brunswick as the example. I know it best, but I really welcome all of our colleagues to input on how this would work regionally. But in the short term, the key is that there should be a public consultation on any new clean energy target for certainly this province. We need long-term legislative reform as well for those of you that like to geek out on those things, but I think we also need this more public-facing component of it. And just to give you the scale of what we're talking about here, if we were to actually close all the fossil plants by 2030, that's over 1,700 megawatts of power. that would require at minimum 45 to 50% of non-hydro renewable energy. And of course, you need to overbuild as well. So I lay out here where these plants are in Baldoon, Colson Cove, Bayside, the size of those plants and the emissions that go with them. So next steps, and then we'll open it up for conversation. Forming alliances. We have some great folks on the ground who do great work. Is there an opportunity for people to be aligned in one direction with one voice, calling for the closure of all fossil plants, all fossil power plants in New Brunswick, and to really move into the clean, non-polluting electricity revolution? We do need to identify trusted messengers. It can't just come from environmental groups. We need people that are trusted from every sector, urban, rural, to be speaking to this opportunity. We need to advance our campaign tactics, and I'm calling here for ongoing discussions with our allies. And expand our networks to better engage youth, especially people as well who identify as female, social justice groups. We're trying to do more at CCNB to do that networking and engage the social justice side of this. As I say, this is not going to be won in terms of electricity reform on a fight over technology. It is a social campaign. This is about what we want, where we live, and how we live. We need to test and refine our frames and our narratives. We need to build, of course, our social media campaign. We are working on a series of events and webinars. We're keen at CCNB to secure resources to do a citizens assembly. We're looking at town hall around the province, but starting in St. John. We're really excited about artist collaboration around electricity issues. So all sorts of things could be on the table. So we do want to collaborate more. We already are regionally and nationally on electricity. We want to do it more with our local groups. And we want to think about how what we want to do here feeds into North America, actually, because of the export dynamics associated with electricity, New England demands for clean electricity. This issue of a clean electricity standard that's been proposed not only in the US, as well as federally under the previous government. We'll see what happens with the election. And this idea of a carbon border adjustment. It is the case, in my view, and I think many others increasingly, that burning coal and oil and gas to generate electricity will not be the electricity that importers want. And so there's an opportunity, I think, there. So why don't I stop there, and I'll stop sharing the screen and open it up. Let's see how I've done. It's 1:47 on my phone. Let me stop here. And just say thank you to everyone for joining and staying. And let me be quiet now and turn it over to you. I will do my best to keep track. I know Lois is here and going to help, and John and Corey. So we'll see who dives in. But if any folks have questions, by all means, please share them. You can do that, of course, in the chat, and you can do that with voice. So I'm looking here at a question in the chat, so let me start there. Why was the climate emergency not specifically part of the survey questions? As a question on climate change, we know people are concerned about climate. So I'm digging into the specifics about electricity, and we actually had quite a bit of a language around climate change in the survey itself. So that's correct. In this case, that wasn't the topic, but we usually I have a pretty good sense of what that is. When do you think we can expect those NB? Oh, okay. So Minister Holland said before the snow flies, whatever that means. And Lois, I know, has reached out. We have tried, as you know, to communicate with him as well on this already. We have a letter that we've already sent. We have a letter writing tool. Maybe John or Corey could throw that into the chat, the link to that. And so, we've started the process, but we actually think we got to make some noise. And I know that the previous target, the 40%, clean energy target was set after consultation in New Brunswick. This is not a big secret here that governments need to just pop this thing out and we can't participate. So there's some near-term noise there. Is your research now available for public for citation? Yes. The what we'll do is the and I'll just let you know, there's a version of the survey up on our website along with the survey. If you look at the climate change section of our website, you'll see campaigns and it's climate change. And if you go into that, you'll see publications and it's there. I have not included in that version the communications framing and campaign tactics. That's for us. The version on the website we've sent to every MLA. And I believe, John, and correct me if I'm incorrect, but also to the MPs at the time. And so that is available for anybody to use by all means. This version will be available to you through the webinar. And of course, it's going to get out there. But by all means, you're welcome to cite it. I can add a citation as needed. There's the clean energy thing. IPCC report recently released suggests targets should be net zero by 2030, then true zero by 2050. I am so happy for this question. Let's, as teammates, all promise each other one thing. We will never say the words net zero by 2050. That is a disaster to talk about 2050. Anything that's 30 years away, people don't care. We need to be only concerned about what happens in the next 10 years. Everything matters that way only. Net zero is an excuse. It's just an excuse for delay. And so, yes, we need to be at zero. And in fact, net negative, we need to be way, way beyond zero and doing so much more to help the planet, given our high per capita emissions. But let's just not use 2050. Let's pretend that's not there. Everything we talk about is about 2030. John is saying letter writing campaign. Thank you. Yes, if we could get to net zero or zero by the mid 2030s, absolutely, that's the right goal. Everything in our work is about the global carbon budget. That's it. It's a math game. Well, it's not a game. It's just a matter of math. At emissions at the level that they're at, there is no room for delay. So we only have 7 or so, 10 years at maximum. And so that's the reality of our situation. There's the letter for those interested. Yes, okay, thank you for that reminder. The environmental debates are tonight. So if you're in Fredericton, if you haven't registered for the environmental debate tonight, do so. That would be really great. And I think that's all I have. Does anybody want to ask a question by talking? Whoops, I just popped my thing out. My excitement.
One of there is many obstacles to break the inertia. But one of these articles is the capital issue. Like presently, the NB Power has a tremendous debt, so it has a big incentive not to move and to buy electricity from others. But at the same time, if there is a capital issue from the government, people could build a solar panel or have a co-op to have wind power. And I heard many years ago that Nova Scotia had allowed the utility to buy the electricity that the private people were producing with the excess, the net meter. In New Brunswick, if you have a net meter, actually, if you produce more than you consume, you lose it, and so they steal it from you. So, but I think if we had a law that forced the government to buy the electricity which is produced by individual or by co-op, then we would have an obstacle, one less obstacle to the movement toward renewable.
Absolutely. So great comments there. what I'm going to suggest is actually, because there's some folks on the call here who have vast experience with electricity issues. This deserves its own call, this topic, where we focus on the reality of the situation. Half of NB Power's debt actually comes from the money that was spent on Point Lepreau construction and refurbishment. We are in a deep pile of doo-doo on debt at NB Power. We can't pretend that isn't real. We do need to be extremely innovative in terms of how we reform our electricity system, the role of community power, the role of our innovative distribution utilities that want to also generate power, like St. John Energy, the reform of net metering so that we actually have an incentive. We do need to figure this out. I have a lot of time for people at NB Power, actually, because these are not easy issues. And we have a lot of government interference in the electricity system that's never made it easier, I can tell you that. We're under-resourced. Nobody's got money, for example, to participate. Where would we be without, our incredible volunteers who've engaged in the EUB hearings, for example. We need far more support for this conversation, but we also need really innovative thinking. For example, in the Atlantic, do we actually need 4 separate utilities? Could we think so out of the box that we have one integrated system and one integrated utility, or some way for these utilities to actually deal with their competitive issues? Yeah, it's a very serious issue, and I'm not diminishing it any way. It's just today we're talking about, the public side of it and the research, but this is on the policy side of it. This is all we think about, is how do we get around these problems?
Louise?
Sorry, yes.
Do we know the comparisons in the cost per kilowatt hour between solar, wind, energy from Quebec Hydro versus SMRs?
Oh, well, we don't have estimates yet on the cost of SMRs because we don't have any. There are estimates that are coming out. It is more expensive. And I'm just looking to see if some of my other colleagues will have this off the top of their heads, because there's an organization called Lazard. There's different organizations that do have different estimates. But NB Power, for example, in the integrated resource plan, even though I would have some disagreement with them about the costing they had for the renewable side, we see that it's lower, for example, in Lazard and so on. Nuclear is higher than that, but we don't have any actual practical experience to know for sure. And please, because my brain is a little bit not in that file right now, by all means, give the numbers if you wanted to. By all means, throw it in the chat. Yeah. Now the other thing, again, not to diminish the challenges. Let's not be naive, right? Because that's how we also weaken our argument, right? Renewables are cost effective on a straight build point of view today, certainly wind, but we also have to include the cost of storage, which is rapidly decreasing in price. We do have the interconnections in terms of if we want to use hydro as a battery. So regardless of what options we choose, there's going to be costs. There's going to be costs. We're going to double the size of the electricity system. We're going to spend money. And so that means it's so much even more important that we are investing in efficiency, right? We can have higher rates, but we can have lower bills, right? We have to be super, super smart about making sure that our infrastructure is efficient, that our retrofit program is active, that low income is prioritized in terms of ensuring that those retrofits happen there first, that we get people off fossil fuels in their home heating. All of that has to be very smartly implemented if this is going to work. And we have to have solid community consultation and engagement. People have to choose wind in their community. They have to choose if we're going to have industrial solar systems in their community. You can't just put these out there. The technology works. We love it. You're going to have it whether you like it or not. It ain't going to work that way. Some of us live through Ontario. And so, again, if we think we're going to double the electricity system, eliminate fossil fuels and do it all in the next 10 years, it's a social revolution that's required. We got to do it because the carbon budget says we must do it. But if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. Oh, thank you, Susan. Lazard. Now, nuclear there, Susan, is not SMR. It's new nuclear, the more traditional nuclear, but the price, she's got the price there for us. Thank you for getting that for us, Susan. So I just don't want us to underestimate the challenge ahead, right? And if we get all excited, thanks, Tim, if we get all excited about the technology and get fixated only on the technology and we miss the need for dealing with the social realities, bringing people along, engaging people in this conversation, we're going to be in trouble. And so that's really what I think this conversation for me is about, launching that conversation about how do we come together as allies to do the hard work that has to be done to bring the population along so that we can get to where we want to go. Okay, Renee has a question in video. I don't know what that means.
It's Danielle who has a question.
Okay.
Okay.
It's more a comment than a question. So integrating the 4 provinces has an advantage if we're going to develop wind power, because it doesn't, the wind is not active everywhere at the same time. So if you connect, then you have more economy of scale. Now, I have another question also, is that in electricity, there is power and there is energy. This is 2 different things. If you, for example, on the 25th of December, when all the lights are on and it's it's 25 minus 20 outside, there is a need of a lot of power, and this power costs more than the same energy spent at another time of the day. So would it be desirable to push for time modulated rate?
Yeah, time of use rates. It's interesting. I also think that's worth a conversation among us over time. Obviously, several provinces have time of use rates. It's been operational in many provinces. New Brunswick's really resisted it. MB Power has resisted it because we are a province that heats so much with electricity. They just argue that we won't necessarily get the benefits. I'm not sure what the answers are, but I think it's worth engaging expertise to help us figure out what's the right solution here for us in the Atlantic. Yeah, and then I'll go to you, Susan. I haven't forgotten, and then we'll tie it up. Yeah, go ahead.
I heard that in Europe, you cannot start your cold dryer at 5 o'clock in the evening.
Right.
So because it's just, it's not a differential in power. It's just you can't put it on. So because it's the time of high demand, and you should refrain from using this. There is probably some kind of a social campaign to incite people to change. But if this won't be working very much if there is no price differential.
Yeah, absolutely. And Margot's just also pointing out it's not just efficiency, right? It's conservation. And totally agree. Obviously, we've got to use less overall. And it's just part of that frugality that comes with being frugal in how we interact with the planet and how we interact with the energy that we use. Susan, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, thanks. Great presentation, Louise. Who do you think? 2 questions, sorry. Who do you think should be our target audience? I'm going to get your slides, but and do you think we should bother with the wealthy conservatives or just write them off because they're not going to change their mind? That's question 1. Question 2 is this whole issue of climate justice, which you kind of touched on, but obviously our push to renewables is going to have impacts in terms of mining, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
How do we integrate those larger climate justice issues, environmental racism, everything,
Yep.
with what we're asking for? Thank you.
Perfect. That's great. So target audiences. So I guess if you're conservative and you're certainly engaged on these issues, I might say, I wouldn't pick that audience first. What I would pick are the unopinionated, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum or an income spectrum. The unopinionated are the ticket because they're not yet engaged on the issue. And so who are those folks? They tend to be women in particular. And I think we need a way to engage people who identify as feminine or women, female, because they actually have a huge opportunity to influence this conversation. And again, I say it because they're, I think, more engaged on the social side of it, on the ethics side of it, not the technology side of it. The technology side of it is a very male-dominated conversation, certainly an engineering conversation. And so I'm thinking about it a bit differently, but Susan, you're hitting on the kind of the next step for John and Corey and Lois and me and Adam at CCMB in terms of social media testing. So these are the kinds of things that we'll be testing. And those audiences would all be part of that exploration. On climate justice, totally. I'm most concerned in the short term with not only where renewable energy projects could go and how that affects communities and disadvantaged people in communities, but very much concerned about the perspective people might have on affordability. Which means that everything we do has to front load ensuring that low-income households are protected and participate in this prioritized. But the other point you raised is around mining and so on. And this is my comment on let's not be naive. Let's not be so overconfident in the technology that we don't remember the point that Margot raised, which is we're not solving climate change with everybody having an electric car. Like, we've got to reduce our demands overall. And being a person who lives in a rural place, I have to say, I just bought an electric car. But really, like, we have got to scale back, and we've got to insist on a circular economy, on life cycle assessment, on ensuring that our products are produced in ways that are environmentally and socially responsible. And there are options. And so very, very critical points. And again, if we don't do this, we are not going to build a social consensus for the revolution that's required. We're talking less than 10 years. So how it happens, it's, in my opinion, it's building allies and then kind of releasing everybody to go do the work that they do. And so part of what at least we're trying to do with the resources that we have, and I really am hoping that we actually can increase the resources that we have, including bringing in some money that we can re-grant to other groups. Like, that's a big part of my thinking right now. How do we get more money to everybody to do the work they know best? And that would include working with our colleagues in Mining Watch and that kind of thing. Yeah, no, those are great questions. Okay, so
would it be appropriate to get the youth with us, the adolescents?
Yes.
Young,
yes.
Actually, because this is their future.
Yes. So you'll see that in the slides I point out that in fact we've got to do way better on youth engagement, particularly around some of these conversations on electricity options. And so it's a priority. How we're going to do it, I'm completely open, because I'm the grandmother. It's not my thing to figure it out, because I work with youth every day. We work with youth in the education system. We work with youth in our networks. But really, this has got to be youth-led. So how do we do that in our region? I'm trusting that our colleagues who are there, not the grandmothers, although grandmothers are doing their part to help with that part of the solution, but it's fundamental. Young people and women, I tell you, and social justice groups are going to be critical to this story. Yeah. Okay, so I really enjoyed having this conversation with you all, and I hope we get to do it soon. I see a couple of additional webinars that we need to do, including on some of the social dynamics, but also on some of the community engagement and activism dynamics. So we'll be back. So on that, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you all for attending. Bye, everybody.